Welcome to Beyond the Code, the podcast where industry experts and brilliant legal minds discuss the impact of new emerging technologies. I'm your host, Yitzy Hammer, a lawyer and tech enthusiast. Join us as we explore the legal, regulatory, and ethical issues surrounding AI, blockchain, and more. Get ready to go beyond the code and stay ahead of the game. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Code. Today, I'm joined by Shmuel Abramzon, who is the Chief Economist at Israel's Ministry of Finance. Confused, so am I. I've never heard of a chief of anything in the Israeli government before, except for the chief scientist, which no longer exists, and now it's replaced by the Innovation Authority. Why don't you tell me, for starters, what is the chief economist? And what do you do?
Okay, first of all, there are a few other chiefs. I'm not the only chief. There's chiefs of staff to a lot of ministries, right? And there's the big chief of staff of the army, but I'm the chief economist. I'm a senior employee, senior official at the Ministry of Finance. I report to the Ministry of Finance, and I'm in charge of basically roughly three things at the Israeli Ministry of Finance. I do all the research, the policy research. I do the forecasting, the macroeconomic forecasting, inflation, and other interesting indicators. Then I do policy support, policy analysis. I do tax policy specifically. This is one of my main hats. And then I'm also in charge of international affairs. Because of this broad portfolio, here and there I also do special projects of policy analysis, including in the area of digital assets in Israel.
Okay, which is an important one that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So are you like an analyst on steroids?
I have many analysts in my team, and they are the ones who...
But I mean, as far as your function is concerned, like you guys do predominantly research, right? You're not a regulator, you're not making laws, you're not actually creating policy, you're just advising on policy and best practice, right?
So, the line is thin when it comes to that. We don't do only analysis and just be the smart guys and say what to do. Many times in government, you need to actually be in the front and be part of the process of pushing things to happen, meaning we're also involved in legislation and cabinet decisions and so forth. So the truth is it's well beyond an analyst that you might imagine in a private firm.
So are you guys more reactive? Like, do you wait for certain government bodies to come to you and ask you to opine on things? Or are you proactive, I guess, like the comptroller's office that's like constantly looking for things that they could, projects that they could work on and ways that they could make the economy better?
So I would say we are hopefully more proactive.
Okay.
But I would say there are some, it's not that we are reactive, but there are some, I would say, routines that we follow. Okay, so there's some jobs we need to do and we just do them. For example, every time we submit a budget to the government or a multi-year budget plan, we have to bring the projections. We have to forecast, so we know our task. So I wouldn't call it, proactive, reactive. It's just there's things we do. Whenever comes a decision, in that sense, maybe we are somewhat reactive. Then we are asked to give our opinion on it and so forth. But it's kind of a combination, and there are definitely areas, of course, that we initiate in policy.
Well, I recognize on your LinkedIn that the chief economist is under the Ministry of Finance, which was kind of surprising to me. I assume that you'd be under the Ministry of Economy. Why is it structured that way? And like, what's the difference between them?
So there's a difference between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economy. Ministry of Finance is has a much more overarching position over the whole economy.
Okay.
We do budgeting, for example. We make sure the budget is implemented in various ministries and so forth. Ministry of Economy is more focused on direct support of firms mainly, okay, or more practical work in the economy, if that makes sense.
Okay. So if you had to walk me like through like a standard day in the life of the chief economist, like what does your day-to-day look like?
Okay, so a day to day. First of all, usually I don't decide. I have my calendar, and meetings come
And
from above and beyond and wherever.
okay.
In every
So what, you come to the office
organization,
and you're like, what do I have to do today?
right. So usually I check it
The night
an
before.
evening before or a week before. And there's meetings that I usually am expected to attend. There's the meetings of the management meetings in the ministry per week. There are other issues that are like regular meetings that come. Like every month, we have to see how, we have a meeting and we see how's the budget doing, how much tax did we collect, and so forth. So there's like periodical stuff. There's a lot of processes, as I said, that I connect to the government. So I'm invited to a cabinet meeting or a meeting at the minister's office on some task. And there's of course a lot of internal work. So I have roughly 40 employees, professional
Wow.
employees, that
Okay.
each one has a portfolio, and there's projects that we follow, and I work with them on them.
Okay. So before I jump into digital assets, I want to just kind of go back a little bit to the beginning and ask you a little bit about your background. Your English is, fairly decent and some.
Thank you.
Did you grow up in the States at all?
So I lived in the United States for two extended periods in my life, once as a child at the age of 5, and then later I did my PhD there. That was
Your
30 years after.
parents were American? Like what how did
No,
you
no,
end
my
up as a
parents,
child?
I was born in Israel,
Okay.
but my dad did a postdoc in the United States, and as a family, we spent there 3 years when I was a child.
Your
Then I
dad
came back.
is an academic?
He's actually not. He's not in academia. He did have a PhD and did a postdoc, but he worked in the private sector.
Hmm.
As a
Okay.
scientist,
So that was when you were
R&D.
younger, and then you did your PhD in the United States as well.
Right, right. That
Okay,
was
so that's where your English comes from. And how has that affected your career and your ability to become a chief? How does one even become the chief scientist?
being in the United States.
Chief
You mean?
chief economist.
I don't mind. Economics is a science. Some say.
It absolutely
Anyway,
is.
yeah. So the question is about the United States. You mean how
I mean,
that affects?
the question number one is how does one become the chief economist? And number two, I wonder like how your time spent in the United States, which maybe gave you more of like a holistic and global perspective on things, might have affected that. I know that, like for example, in many other professional fields, you need to go abroad a little bit in order to be able to succeed at home. I wonder if it's a similar case in your situation.
Um, so it's not a must, but I can say personally that the fact that I spent these periods in the United States gave me a ton of value and a lot of abilities. I always say it's one of the biggest gifts my parents gave me, and really the ability to be in touch culturally, absorb different perspectives, different ideas, and especially above all from the United States, which is really an amazing country and has so much and such a is really the global leader. So of course, specifically English is key. And I definitely think that doing your PhD studying abroad is something that brings tremendous value. Something I can recommend to anyone who has the opportunity to do. How do you become a chief economist? So I guess there's different ways. I think in general in life, you never know how to plan and things bring you from one place to another. And there's just a lot of opportunities. Some of them come to you. In my case, I can say that fairly early on, after the military service and after studying in the university, I fairly early on in my career, I decided and identified myself as someone who wants to be a public servant, basically a government official. If you wish, you can call it a bureaucrat, even being at the professional level at the government, and specifically dealing with economics, which is my favorite topic, and I'm very, very interested in. So this combination of being, a public servant in economics made it natural for me to be in the government. And then I did a very, very variant, interesting, I think, career. I've served in different units, different places. I said I spent some time in the United States with my PhD, but actually I did it very interesting place at the Rand Corporation, where I was able to work basically in a think tank also.
What does Rand do? Like, I know a lot of different think tanks have different, modus operandi. What is Rand's main focus, and what did you do when you were there?
So Rand, I don't think they have one main focus. They support decision making, and they do it through government, but they do it through semi-academic activities, also different grants and so forth. And they have many topics. They're historically known, especially for defense policy and health policy. But in fact, I hardly dealt with those aspects. I did some defense policy, but I did different projects from energy policy. I was part of a team that advised other governments, for example, the Israeli government, but also the Kurdish government in Iraq. And I did some interesting work on energy use and the effects of the environmental effects of energy and so forth. So really very, very broad portfolio. Rand brings a lot of very varied opportunities to one.
Very cool. Okay, so as we segue into crypto, which is a big focus of this podcast, one question that I always ask my guests, and I guess it's no different with you, but here I just really have no idea, is the first Bitcoin ever mined is considered the Genesis block. So I would ask you, what is your Genesis block? Like, what was your first exposure to crypto and blockchain? I see there's a smirk there.
No, I'm thinking, the truth is, I think I'm trying to remember. I do remember that when I wasn't working here, I was actually working at the Prime Minister's office, then started this whole hype around digital coins and Bitcoin and so forth.
When was that? You missed that in.
It was in
your bio.
It was, I would say, around 2016, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Not that early. But there was this hype. We were starting to realize and recognize that there's something going on very interesting in the market. And we asked people to come and teach us, people from the private sector, from the Israeli high-tech sector. So they came to the Prime Minister's office and gave us a lecture, a talk. And that's where things started to click.
I'm curious. So in 2016, and like the guys that you invited, do you have any idea who they were?
No, I can't remember.
How did you tap into the local crypto community at that time?
When you're in the government, especially in the Prime Minister's office and others, you have fairly good access, especially in Israel, it's a small country, you have good access to at least the industry leaders. There's some associations sometimes and so forth. So I'm not sure who was it, but you know how it is in Israel. It's enough, one person, he brings it to the other person, brings it to the other person. So it's fairly easy. That's part of our magic here.
Okay, so that was like, I mean, you're a finance guy, you're an economics guy. You had, all your degrees are in finance or in economics. So when you first heard about digital assets, about Bitcoin, and you were at the Prime Minister's office and you called this meeting to try and get a better understanding, like in your own individual personal capacity, were you, did a light bulb go off? Were you like very curious and intrigued? Did you explore more on your own, or did you just kind of like roll with it in your professional capacity?
So I will say, it was very interesting. I can't say that I spent too much time on it, and that only came back to me several years later when I was tasked by the Minister of Finance to convey a report. So it took several years. I can say that from the beginning, this whole Bitcoin issue and cryptocurrencies, I think, is quite tough for economists to understand, because the first question we ask is, what's the value? Why would anyone want to trade and spend thousands of dollars on bits, basically, on electrical
I can understand the skepticism.
There's really a big problem to explain to economists many times. So what's the value? What creates the value, and so forth? I do think I did understand, because I was asking myself, and I didn't give myself easy answers or saying, well, it's wrong, it doesn't make sense, it's BS, whatever. So I actually forced myself to try to understand what's the deal. And I think today I can definitely give a pitch.
Okay.
which is good. I did that to the Minister of Finance and
You want to
others.
try me?
We can try. I think first of all, it's very important to understand that there's technological change here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't always. Sometimes they jump into just talking about coins, but at the end of the day, there's this technological value of DLT systems. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very important to anchor yourself on that and understand this is the value proposition, I would say, of this.
So do you come at it from a technological perspective? Like, is that your
It
pitch?
it's not my pitch, but it's not the whole pitch. But I'm saying this is an anchor that you have to start any discussion when you try to explain what's in it. You have to make sure that people understand there's a technological change, and the value, of course, is the ability to basically eliminate the need for some of the middlemen. Okay, specifically the banking system
Yes.
or other
Right.
financial actors, which is something that when you understand that, then you're able to already talk about value. I do want to say that over the years, I think it was evident for many that the promise is not fully fulfilled with digital assets because there's other middlemen that come in the middle instead of banks. So, and we know some of them collapsed over the years.
They're not a necessity, but they're currently an
So they're
unfortunate
they're not a
evil.
necessity, but at the moment, I think the only pure example that we have is Bitcoin, of basically a phenomenon that's running completely,
Fully decentralized. Yeah.
fully decentralized. That's why Bitcoin for us is really a very, very special case. And all the others, when there's some middlemen required for the process, it could be different kinds of middlemen, of course. It could be a stock exchange, it could be a
Developers,
broker,
promoters. Yeah.
be developer, promoter, it could be even a bank that holds something, or
Sure.
an association that follows that creates the monitors, whatever. Then comes the government and asks itself, should I regulate it, and how should I regulate it? And then it becomes more messy from a government point of view, but this is kind of where we're standing.
Okay, so your first exposure was when you were in the prime minister's office, and then you got this thought group together to try and understand a little bit more what's going on. And then after that thought group, you presumably put it out of your mind because you moved on to other more important issues. And then later on, when you were already at the Israel Ministry of Finance and you were senior deputy to the previous chief economist, you were tasked with putting together this report. I don't know what it's called in English, but I've read it extensively. It's called in Hebrew Doch Hasdarat Tchum HaNechassim HaDigitalim, the report on how to, I guess, solve the issue of the digital asset industry.
Not
A
solve,
proposed
regulate.
roadmap. What's
Regulate.
that?
That's the word. Regulate.
Regulate.
Asdara
Asdara.
means
Okay,
regulate.
is to solve via regulation.
No, we're not going to solve. By the way, there's no solution,
We're
right?
going to provide
But there's
guidance
just
and
to
guidelines.
regulate. I would say it's basically risk management, if you
Okay.
wish.
And this report was put out almost 3 years ago. I'm curious on two things. Number one, what was the process like for putting together this report? Presumably, you needed to gather a lot of information and sit with a lot of the regulators and the banks and the other interested parties, and probably presumably with the local community, or I hope, anyways, and with some of the local service providers. What was the process like writing that report, and what has happened as far as you're concerned in the 3 years since then?
So it's an interesting question. Actually, processes of convening a broad report in the government is quite a delicate and complex task. Might be more complex than one could imagine because there's so many stakeholders involved, even just in the government, so many different interests and so many different perspectives. It could be a legal perspective, it could be a more professional perspective, but then there's different regulators, and there's different regulators that care about different things. Some care about the stability of the system, and some care about more about the consumer, and some care about competition, and some care about privacy, and everyone kind of pulls the I don't know if you can say it in English, the quilt to their
Yeah, they try to grab their side.
everybody tries to grab themselves. So what we did actually was fairly smart. We actually didn't call it a committee or a group. It was our report, the Chief Economist report, and we just went and
Gathered.
gathered information. We didn't create it was our report. It wasn't a full government committee with any consensus or anything like that. And I think it made things kind of quicker and in many ways more focused. You can see the report. There's also a quick abstract, a short abstract in English. And what we did was really ask the basic questions in that report. What are we trying to achieve? That I think it's a very important question when you come to government policy. What are we doing? Why are we interested at all? There's upsides, but there's also risks that we need to manage. And then comes the question, what kind of risks? So there's risks that are protecting consumers, and we've seen that unfortunately over the years with digital assets that consumers were susceptible to either fraud or misunderstanding, misinformation, so forth.
Right, but unfortunately, in none of those instances, when push came to shove, and whatever FTX or other, gargantic companies failed, Israeli consumers also U.S. consumers, and we know how hard the SEC tried to protect them or to not get involved in that sense. They were not spared from these tragedies, because there's always a way, and by not creating clear regulatory guidelines, by not opening up, by not providing the tools for these companies to come and be compliant here in Israel, you were just forcing Israeli consumers, U.S. consumers, to find other ways to get involved with these products, and then they were left unprotected at the end of the day.
So I agree that not having good regulation in place pushes people to go to unregulated
or any regulation,
Right. Absolutely, I'm with you on that, and I think we need to create clear regulations. It's a tough task
that's on the consumer side. I think in most cases the issue, at least in Israel, is not that anybody cares too much for the consumer, but rather we have the banks who are, and I always say, to their credit, they're for-profit companies. Like, in the end of the day, they want to continue to make money, and they don't want to be fined by the regulators, who in Israel can't seem to come to a consensus as to what their thoughts are vis-a-vis digital assets and how we need to regulate them. And in many cases, you even have conflicting regulations, where you'll have the Israeli tax authority will say, I don't care where you got your money, just as long as you're paying taxes on it. And then the AML authority will say, no, you don't KYC, you can't come in here. And you have the banking authority, which says, like, no, can't park your money here. So, like, this report that you put together was supposed to provide a framework for these guys to come together, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya. Like, what's happening?
What's happening? So I think first of all, I think there's different. It is important to understand exactly where the problem lies, and I think that it's fairly two separate issues. There's the issues of not creating clear regulations in Israel for the local market, and there was some developments there. But the other more delicate and I would say sensitive and unsuccessful areas is the issue with the banks, and that I completely agree. So regardless of regulation of service providers and digital assets in Israel, the banks in Israel really put a lot of barriers for bringing the money into the Israeli banking system. Money that's originated in digital assets. That's a huge hurdle, and I think when we look at it, it's still a huge problem. And the problem is from our point of view at the Ministry of Finance is related to lack of competition in many ways. So they said they're for profit. Basically, they don't want to take the risk that that maybe they might find themselves challenged by other authorities, AML and so forth. But I think it's beyond that. It's probably very low appetite for exploring these new opportunities. And that you don't see all around the world. You see in most countries that there's a competitive banking sector, that if not the big banks that deal with crypto, you'll find niche banks or small banks that could provide you these services. And unfortunately in Israel, we don't have these small more innovative players that actually give you services. That's a huge
And why is that?
problem. Yeah.
Like,
I
why
think it's
aren't
a
banks like Revolut and Wise being given access to Israeli consumers?
so Revolut is a foreign entity, and we're actually very much interested in them entering the market, and we're trying to create all the. It's mainly, by the way, the central bank which regulates the bank. They're trying to create the conditions for them to come and operate in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
When Revolut decides to come or not to come to Israel or any other company of that sort, they ask themselves whether it's worth it for them. Is there enough market? Is there enough profit? I am optimistic on this, but over the years we weren't successful in bringing foreign entities, and you can ask them why they didn't find the Israeli market attractive enough for them.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Hopefully
The
we
question is,
can
why
get
aren't the
over that.
local markets, the existing local markets, local players, sorry, why aren't they providing these services? And that's a
I mean, I think that's an obvious
question.
answer. Like, and you already touched on it. Like, in the end, these guys have to look out for their own pockets, and it's obviously not worthwhile enough for them to take the risk here because they have enough business as it is. I don't know. I'm suggesting. You could feel free to disagree.
Yeah, no, I think that's the way to put it. At the end of the day, when there's a competitive environment and they're looking for new opportunities, they'll go there. And
Right. So
probably the environment is not competitive enough.
so if we
And
increase
that's the
competition
challenge.
and allowed other smaller banks from abroad to come in, and they would be less risk averse, and they would open up access to digital assets. For example, Revolut has crypto and fiat in their wallets. If Israeli consumers had access to that, then they wouldn't. I assume that all crypto related banking would go in Israel would go directly to Revolut. And then maybe the local banks would say, oh, whoa, we're missing out on something here. And then they would feel more compelled to offer those services as well.
We definitely hope to see Revolut soon in Israel, but it's not Revolut specifically, but any other players,
Amen.
and it will happen. It's at one point, I believe.
Okay. So, as far as being proactive in regulation here in Israel, I remember when the GDPR came out in 2018. Basically, that was Europe being forward thinking, and then every other country kind of slowly followed suit and basically like copy pasted their own version of GDPR. Israel has similar, still not as robust as GDPR, but similar regulatory framework for privacy laws. We recently saw Mika come into force in Europe. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on whether we'll see an Israeli version of Mika anytime soon, or maybe it's a question of waiting for the U.S. to catch up. I had the SEC commissioner Hester Pierce here on the show a few months ago, and I told her that I was very disappointed in her and the SEC in that Israel hadn't been at all forthcoming with regulation on digital assets, mainly because we looked to the SEC as a first mover, and since they hadn't been moving, or maybe even they had been moving in reverse, we had failed to do anything substantial in that field. Do you think it's just a question of waiting for the U.S. to catch up, or maybe we'll even beat them to it?
So we are actually working on stablecoin regulation as we speak. There's
Okay.
The report resulted in a cabinet decision that said Ministry of Finance needs to decide who the regulator is. There's a question of who would be the regulator on stablecoins, and the Minister of Finance decided several months ago that one of the regulators, which is the capital markets regulator, will be in charge of regulating the issuance of stable coins. So they have a year, and they were granted a year, and they're working on this as we speak. And
Okay.
the current reference point is actually Mika in the EU, because there's, as you said, there's no other really strong
First
benchmark.
mover.
First mover. We realize that Europeans are considered to be fairly conservative in their regulation. So if the United States comes up with something, creative, interesting that will be compelling, we're still free to change course.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, but currently, since The EU is really the only big benchmark there. So we are following the MiCA kind of way of thinking, at least in principle.
Okay, that's very positive, and it's good to hear that. I wonder, what your thoughts are on decentralized finance generally, as a finance man, and also, in a region marked by financial instability. We're in the midst of a war, and probably looking at a lot of hard years ahead. Do you see crypto playing a stabilizing or destabilizing role in Israel's economic strategy, particularly vis-a-vis regional trade or the shekel?
Okay, big questions. First of all, regarding DeFi, kind of connects to what I said in the beginning. I think we realized that there's really no pure DeFi, at least from my understanding. Maybe you can teach me otherwise, but there's no pure decentralized. At the end of the day, there is some players that will be involved to some extent, and therefore we do need to be careful and make sure that these entities, do not use their powers in bad ways. There's no fraud involved. There's enough disclosure, so forth, that consumers understand their risks and so forth.
So
So
before you answer on the second question, I beg to differ. There is such a thing as truly decentralized. I often say that in the in the case of most DeFi or any decentralized platform, nothing starts, almost nothing, even Bitcoin, nothing starts from decentralized from day one. There's always this process of gradual decentralization. And I think with many of the protocols in the industry, we're still in that gradual process. Some are more decentralized than others. But yeah, there definitely needs to be oversight on how decentralized you are, because it's a slippery slope. And again, our main goal is to protect consumers in the end of the day. But I do believe that there is such a thing as decentralized.
it could be, but there's someone who created the decentralization, as you said. So it could be some kind of firm, some kind of
But with
fintech.
true governance, anybody can come in and it can change that.
Okay, but someone set the rules in the beginning of
Yeah,
creating the rules of
yeah.
providing the ability to decentralize, so forth. So there's always, when you go back, right, there's kind of this there's someone who might be in charge, which is, I
there's
think, is
a
important, because at the end of the day, you because these tools, these
no. I totally
issues
understand where
are
you're coming
complex.
from.
You want to have someone that you ask them the questions, right? Why this
There,
and not that? How do
for
you
sure.
make
I,
sure that
that's
the consumer's interests are kept and so forth?
that's the downside of having decentralized protocols, that there's nobody ask the questions. There's no customer service. If you messed up, you messed up. Like, there's a podcast that I very much enjoy called Radio Lab. It's like a more of like a science geek kind of podcast. It's not crypto related, but they had years and years and years ago, an episode where they documented the launching of a token called Zcash, or the Bitcoin Cash. I can't remember. It's called The Ceremony, where they like really like followed the entire process of how to create a decentralized protocol that nobody has trust issues with, under believing that it actually is decentralized. And the lengths that they went to do this are insane. I'll send you the podcast. I'll share it in the show notes. But yeah, I understand they're when you talk about trust lists and consensus and decentralized and governance, these are difficult terms to wrap your head around.
Right. So anyway, it is exciting and promising. Don't get me wrong. I think that anything we can do to make our financial system more competitive, more efficient, is good. Is really good, and it's going to serve us. We just have to make sure that we manage the risks, and it's tough. As we've seen over the years, it's tough to make sure someone really monitors this and make sure that your money isn't stolen at the end of the day, or just you put your money in things that the risk was not manageable. So that's
So the
that. In
question
terms of
of financial instability.
right. I think it's a big question. I don't think I know the answer to it. I don't think anyone really knows the answer. It really depends on the ability of these digital assets to hedge other risks, right? There's this
Sure.
big question of correlation. And once we thought there's negative correlation, so they can hedge you. And then we realized it's not really the case, and Bitcoin is correlated with markets. I think it remains to be seen, but I do think that probably diversifying portfolios is a good thing. It's something that we've been taught in university. So why not in this case in many ways? So if the assets have a basic level of safety, I would say, and regulation, I don't want any people to invest in. I don't want to use bad words on this podcast, but in trash. As long as it's worth something and it's good enough regulatory wise, then why not diversify to some extent? I think it makes sense to some extent given the risks.
Okay, obviously, there's no, do your own research. This is not financial advice. But I'm asking in your, with wearing your bureaucrat hat, and as someone who advises the Ministry of Finance, would you consider recommending to the Israeli government to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
First of all, in fact, Israel doesn't have the Ministry of Finance itself doesn't have a strategic reserve.
Okay.
The ones that keep the reserve are the central bank, and
Okay.
it's complete. They're completely independent about it, and they don't need my advice.
Okay.
I can say that I will
But
say
if they
this
asked you, as the chief
no.
economist,
So they do allocate a very, very, very small proportion of their assets also to more alternative assets, I would say. Okay. So if they would find that any of these digital assets, the current ones or future ones, meet the basic standards that are required for other alternative investments, then sure. But I think it's.
But you would not be opposed to the idea.
Excuse me?
I said you would not be opposed to the idea.
I'm not completely opposed, but you have to make sure that the risks are manageable. So it's kind of there's this slogan of same risk, same laws, same rules,
same technology, same regulation.
Right. So as long as the risks of these assets are comparable to other risks and manageable, then you should apply to them the same way of looking. And if the central bank or whoever holds the reserves decides that the risk is similar, there's no inherent problem with digital assets. Okay.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. We're going to wrap up in a minute. I want to ask you, we have you're on this platform. You presumably will be listened to by lawyers and policymakers and regulators from different places around the world. How could I help you? What message would you be interested in getting out to other people around the globe, as far as collaborating on economic policy or otherwise?
A few things. First of all, I would say take our concerns seriously. Take government's concerns seriously. I think rightfully there's a lot of criticism of government, and I think we earned it well, and not only in Israel. In many places, you see how slow governments are, how slow legislators are. And so we are always going to be not one step, but many steps behind the private market. It's basically an inherent thing in government. But I would recommend to take some of these risks definitely seriously, because I think that we've seen in the crypto world over the years that we're kind of dismissing the risks, and then people lost a lot of their money, and this could have collapsed the whole business. So I would recommend be patient and do try to find solutions to some of these risks, and then I think slowly but surely government will also follow.
Amen to that. One last question, and it's a personal one. Do you hold any Bitcoin?
No. First of all, the answer is no.
Okay.
So not.
Do you hold any crypto?
I'll repeat it. No, I don't hold crypto for the simple reason that personally I wanted not to be involved emotionally.
Okay.
I thought it will be more smarter as someone who's very much involved in legislation. It doesn't mean though that I'm against or pro. Don't take it that way. It comes from my position.
Okay. I would argue on the flip side of that how could you possibly advise and opine on an industry, on a technology that you haven't actually been exposed to, that you haven't felt it with your fingers? It's one of the criticisms that I had.
Fair criticism. I'm open
It's
to
one of the
any
criticisms I
criticism.
had on SEC Commissioner Pierce, and she shared with me that it was her main criticism herself on their government policy. Unfortunately, it's not her choice, since they're politically appointed. They are barred from engaging with these products. But I don't think that one could really opine and understand these things at a deep enough level without actually interacting with them on their own.
But
so I would urge you
the question
to
is,
reconsider.
if I would buy a Bitcoin, I'm not sure it will mean
I'm not
feeling with
asking
your
you
fingers. I am
I'm not
following the
asking you
market.
to invest millions of dollars. I'm asking
Right.
you to
feel
buy
how they
or receive
move.
like $10 of Bitcoin.
I did get like a feel of what a digital wallet is. I did have like mock experience, whatever you call it, but I don't hold it.
So if you would consider, I would be more than happy to send you $10 of Bitcoin just so that you could experience what it feels like to receive crypto unhindered from one party to another. You give it some thought, and if you're interested, we'll take it offline afterwards.
Thank you. Okay. Well,
Shmuel, thank you
Thank you
very, very much for joining me. I want to also wish you a Chag Sameach. We are at just a few hours away from Israeli Memorial Day, and then Independence Day the day after that. So happy holidays to you. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, want to find out more about what the Chief Economist office does, if they want to read your reports, where could they find that information?
I think the easiest way maybe is in LinkedIn. You can check the Chief Economist department or myself and just connect with us through that. Okay. Follow us through there. I think that will be the. We have also a website, so forth, but I think maybe today that will be the most active platform.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Yitzy. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.